Hi, so I'm Naomi, and today I'm going to be doing a presentation on Sacco and Vanzetti. So first, the history. In 1918, the Red Scare, or fear of communism, causes government officials to fear those with different political views because both anarchism and wanted to overthrow the government. So it becomes linked with communism. And then in February 1919, one of the anarchist publications that was circulating New England, it was presumably written by Italian American anarchists, and it threatened to hurt government officials because of the ongoing deportations of anarchists. In June 1919, Sacco and Vanzetti are rumored to have taken part in a bombing by a fellow anarchist. The two men had met up in Boston for an anarchist meeting. They had actually previously gone to Mexico with a group of Italian anarchists to avoid being drafted to the war. And then in 1919, the government starts rounding up anarchists for deportation. So now the crimes. In December 1919, 4 men attempt to rob LQ White Shoe Company in Bridgewater, Massachusetts of their payroll money. They fired a shotgun at a moving payroll truck but were unsuccessful. On February 15, 1920, in South Braintree, Massachusetts, 2 armed men killed 2 employees of the Slater and Morrow Shoe Company. They robbed them of the money they were carrying, which was about $15,000 then. So to put it in perspective, today that would be around $192,000. So a lot of money. The thieves and murderers were picked up by a car. Witnesses saw the men get into a getaway car driven by other men. There was not a lot of evidence found at the scene. There were several bullet shell casings that were manufactured by 3 different companies. And witnesses did tell police that 2 Italian-looking men were at the scene, and one had a dark handlebar mustache. So now the investigation. The focus on the investigation was on a repair shop where Boda had left his car. The car looked like it may have been the car that was the getaway car that was used in the murder. And the police had phoned the car company and said, if anybody comes to pick up the car, to phone us, and we're going to come straight away, so to stall them, because we want to track down who was in it, because the thought process was whoever comes to pick up the car, it's their car, and they were probably involved in the murder. So when Sacco and Vanzetti and Boda come to pick up the car, they were becoming suspicious over the fact that it seemed like the car company employee was stalling them, and they left before the police came. The police did catch up with them and found them to be armed with guns, and they arrested them. Police questioned why Sacco and Vanzetti had come to pick up the car, and they felt they had to lie in order to not be deported. They were trying to cover up, and the police felt like they weren't exactly being honest. Now evidence in trial, attempted robbery. Several witnesses said that Vanzetti did look like the robber that had fired the shotgun in the first robbery, but in that specific one, the witnesses did not identify Sacco as a suspect. Vanzetti is then charged with attempted robbery that was committed in December 1919. Vanzetti did have an excuse to why he was not at the trial that day. Why he could not have been involved in the case. And he said that it was because he was delivering fish to his customers, and therefore he was busy that day and couldn't have been involved. And The prosecution countered this argument with witnesses from the failed robbery attempt. 5 witnesses said that Vanzetti was the robber, and 20 others said he was not. Vanzetti did decline to be a witness in his own trial, possibly to avoid disclosing that he was an anarchist. Vanzetti is found guilty of assault with an attempt to rob, and he was sentenced to jail for 12 to 15 years. Evidence and trial: the Braintree murder. The same judge and the prosecution were involved in this trial as in the last trial, so they already did not like Vanzetti, and they had a bias. One of the prosecutor's tactics was to rely on the concept of conscience of guilt. This means that if you have information to hide, then it is a sign of guilt. The prosecution is claiming that Sacco and Vanzetti were lying after their arrest. They may, though, have been lying to conceal that they were anarchists because they feared deportation and not necessarily about their involvement in the case. Witness testimony. Sacco testified that on the day of the murder, he had taken the day off work to go to Boston to request a passport. There were some witnesses that saw Sacco either in transit to Boston or in Boston. Sacco did offer the photo he had used for the passport, but the prosecutor rejected the photo because it was a large size. The clerk at the consulate did not remember seeing Sacco. During the trial, Vanzetti's defense was that there were witnesses that had seen him that day and he could not have been involved in the crime. Forensic evidence, starting with guns. The prosecution presented that the gun found on Vanzetti was taken from the guard who was murdered at Braintree. At his arrest, Vanzetti is said to have lied about where he got the gun and how much he had paid for it. He did say he bought the gun a few months ago to protect himself from robbers because for his work he had to carry cash. The prosecution actually did not disclose that they knew the gun found on Vanzetti was not the same one on the guard, which was obviously unfair to him. When he was arrested, Vanzetti was carrying a .38 caliber Harrington and Richardson revolver. There had been no .38 caliber bullets found at the scene, but the murdered bodyguard's missing gun was a .38 caliber Harrington and Richardson. The prosecution tried to prove that the gun in Vanzetti's possession was the victim's. The guard had taken his gun into a repair shop a few days before he was killed, and the gunsmith who had worked on it told the jury he had installed a new firing pin. The gunsmith was unable, though, to definitely say the weapon in Vanzetti's possession was the same one owned by the bodyguard. And according to the gunsmith, the gun Vanzetti possessed did not have a new firing pin. The defense firearms experts testified that the firing pin in Vanzetti's revolver was not new and therefore could not have been the same gun. So now bullets. The prosecution told the jury that the bullet that killed the guard matched the gun that was found on Sacco the night of the arrest. The state's first ballistic or bullet expert was Proctor, and he testified that bullet number 3 that killed the guard was not consistent with the type of bullet that could have been fired from Sacco's gun. And it was consistent with the type of bullet, but it could not necessarily was his specifically, it just could have been. This was the only bullet out of 6 found in the bodies that was fired from the same brand of gun Sacco had, and Proctor stated that out of 4 bullet casings found at the murder scene, one of the casings was consistent with the markings that were made by Sacco's gun. One of the prosecutor's experts noted that the scratches on bullet number 3 presented were likely caused by a defect in Sacco's pistol. The only other expert that testified that it was possible that one of the bullet casings found at the crime scenes could have been fired from Sacco's gun. Experts for the defense disagreed that the bullet was fired from Sacco's pistol. One expert testified that the grooves on bullet number 3 could not have been fired from a different brand of gun than the one carried by Sacco. The test bullets fired from Sacco's gun did not match the pattern of grooves on bullet number 3. The police captain, who although had a lot of experience, was not necessarily considered a bullet expert, originally testified later. He reported that he had doubts that Sacco's pistol had actually fired the bullet presented at trial. And the cap. A gray cloth cap was found near the body of the guard Dardelli. Prosecutors claimed it resembled one that Sacco owned, and testimony indicated that while at work, Sacco hung his hat on a nail, which is why the lining would have been torn. The cap actually was not the same size as the one Sacco wore. They even tried the hat on Sacco, and it did not fit, but prosecutors claimed it fit anyway. Now for the trial. Sacco and Vanzetti decided to testify during their trial, but prosecutors focused on the fact they were anarchists and they fled to Mexico rather than the facts of the case. And they were trying to spend time exposing Sacco and Vanzetti of their anti-American views and values, and he was trying to get the jury possibly to not like them. On July 14th, 1921, after a short deliberation, the jury found Sacco and Vanzetti guilty of first-degree murder. This is important because in Massachusetts at that time, a conviction for first-degree murder would automatically result in the death penalty. Appeals. So while Sacco and Vanzetti were in prison awaiting their appeal, in 1925, another prisoner who had been charged with the murder of a bank cashier had actually given a letter to Sacco confessing his role in the murder at Braintree. Medeiros, which was the prisoner, reported that he was with a gang of Italians that had made their living by robbing freight cars. The gang was seemed to match the gang headed by Bob Morelli. There was evidence that the members of this gang were out on bail that was stealing shoes from a shoe company that was adjacent to the Braintree murder site. He did provide key details about the Braintree murder. Morelli, the gang leader, actually looked similar to Sacco, so it's possible that witnesses actually saw him and not Sacco, but thought it had been Sacco. Some witnesses identified Morelli as one of the criminals in the Braintree crime, and the defense attorney did present the new information about the suspected robbers to try to get a new trial, but it was denied. The defense team made a last-ditch appeal to the government for leniency, but all appeals were denied, and a date and time was set for the execution, and they did get executed. So I was able to find some recent evidence. An Italian workman years later reported that he did see Sacco with perpetrators of the Braintree crime, but that he did not testify at the time of the trial. And another witness reported seeing Sacco in Boston the day of the murder, later reported 30 years later, but had been asked to lie by anarchists. I'm not exactly sure why, but I found that interesting. A test at the Massachusetts Police Lab in 1961 found that the bullet presented at trial was fired from Sacco's gun. So now we're starting to get more legit evidence. A forensics analysis completed in 1985 found that the .32 caliber bullets found in the pocket of Sacco matched cartridges found at the scene of the murder. The bullets were manufactured at the same machine. And the chief of police later claimed that before the execution, he had told the lab to look for any identification marks, which would have explained the ripping of the cap. So my opinion. So before finding out about the more recent evidence, I kind of was feeling like they shouldn't have been executed because it just seemed like they weren't really getting a fair trial and the prosecutors were really against them. They had decided from the beginning that they didn't like them being anarchists and were completely biased, and there were a lot of things that happened. The gun was not really linked to Vanzetti in terms of evidence, but yet it was presented that he did steal the gun. The cap didn't fit. There just was so much that was not fair that happened at trial that I was really thinking they shouldn't have been executed. And I do think in the end, though, Sacco was guilty and Vanzetti was not. The bullet casings in his pocket matched the ones found at the scene, but there is insufficient evidence on Vanzetti. Evidence shows that Vanzetti's gun did not match the guards, like I said, and the witness evidence was not conclusive. And some witnesses said they saw Vanzetti there, some said they not. So based on the more recent evidence and the fact that the forensics analysis matched Sacco with the cartridges, I feel better saying that Sacco was involved in the case, but I still feel like Vanzetti was not, and it wasn't fair to him. So, thank you.